generations to come.
Welcome to another edition of the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. I'm Zoe Cadman and I am in a small little room, but I'm in South Florida in Ocala awaiting the OBS sale. Randy, looks like you're home for once.
I am where I usually am, Zoe, when we do the podcast here in my home office in suburban Minneapolis. Randy Moss with NBC Sports.
TD Thornton, I'm a correspondent for Thoroughbred Daily News, speaking to you from a little north of Boston today, filling in for Bill Finley, who's on assignment.
Where is Bill? Assignment? Is that a secret assignment we don't know about?
I think that's a euphemism for he's at spring training for the Red Sox.
The truth comes out.
Finally, TD speaks the truth. All right, guys, well, let's get right into it and talk about the Azeri Stakes at Hot Springs, Arkansas, and Torpedo Anna came out with a 95 by a speed figure. Now, when I first initially watched the race, I was like, who did she beat? A mare by El Deal. She's a Louisiana bred, but I looked into her a little bit closer. She's a good mare. She's won 21 of 47 lifetime starts, good for 2.1 million. So, yes, she's never won a graded stake, but she's a hard-knocking old mare. Randy, what did you think of the performance from Torpedo Anna?
Free Like a Girl is the number one all-time earner among Louisiana breds. Ironically, she made her national reputation. And I'm talking about Free Like a Girl here and not Torpedo Anna. I'll get to the, I'm not burying the lead or anything. But Free Like a Girl ran against Idiomatic in Idiomatic's first start of the year after she won an Eclipse Award and came within about that far of beating her. We took her all the way down to the wire and just lost a close one. So Free Like a Girl's a good horse. I thought it was a nice comeback race for Torpedo Anna. She didn't run a huge, big number first time off the layoff, but it was designed to be a prep for the Apple Blossom coming up at Oaklawn, scheduled to be her next start. And I thought that she got pretty much what trainer Ken McPeak and jockey Brian Hernandez Jr. wanted her to get out of it.
Yeah, she didn't have to uncork a blowout performance, but it was still a nice try for the reigning horse of the year, coming back first time off of the layoff. I think the thing that I keyed in on after the race was Kenny McPeak's comments about how calm she was pre-race. There were a few instances last year, maybe in some more warmer weather climates. It was a little cool that day at Oaklawn on Saturday, but there were some instances last year where she got a little hot and bothered during the post-parade and pre-race warm-ups. And she was also breaking from the rail in the Azeri. That's something she'd only done one other previous time in her career. It was in the Travers Stakes when she raced against the boys. She came out a little bit sideways, brushed against the side of the gate. She ended up losing that afternoon, just barely getting beat in a gallant effort behind Fierceness. However, this showed a new dimension of her. She was a little more calm and collected. And don't forget, before the Azeri, there was also another horse who was acting up in the gate. They had to back the field out and reload, and she kept her composure through that as well.
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to ex-jockey Robbie Alvarado, who was galloping her up to the Oaks and has been back on her this year. It is night and day watching her train in the morning. She is so relaxed, so composed, nice long rein. Whatever you want to say about Robbie, and I love Robbie, he is an excellent hand on a horse. He just gets on with her so darn well. I think it's made all the difference. Randy?
Yeah, well, the horse that TD was referring to that was scratched in the starting gate was the horse that was expected to set the pace. So Brian Hernandez Jr. and Julian Leperoux were both, when that horse was scratched, seconds before they load back in, they're recalibrating the strategy in their mind and what they're going to do. Hernandez had expected to stalk the other horse. Now he expected to be on the lead. Julian Leperoux said, well, if Torpedo Anna is going to be on the lead, and it looks like she will, I got to be right on her hip. That's the only chance I have. So the whole race dynamic kind of got changed a little bit. And it was kind of interesting also, Brian Hernandez Jr.'s post-race comments. He said that midway around the second turn, he kind of looked over and he knew that it was Free Like a Girl. And he knew that she had made $2.1 million, and he knew that she had almost beaten Idiomatic. So he said, I need to separate from her. I don't want to get into a dogfight because she's pretty game. So he tried to get Torpedo Anna to separate, and she didn't. And for a second there, turning for home, he's like, uh-oh. And then at the 3/16 pole, suddenly she switched leads, and then she went on with it and separated nicely. So it was a nice prep for Torpedo Anna.
I believe that is the correct word, a nice prep. And it looks like Free Like a Girl and Torpedo Anna will meet again in the Grade 1 Apple Blossom. All right, guys, let's switch gears and move down to Tampa. Fabulous day of racing down there for the Tampa Bay Derby. One of my favorite days of the year of racing at Tampa. What did we think of Owen Almighty? Wire to wire for Brian Lynch, for the Lynch mob.
Well, I think in the immediate aftermath of the race, I looked at it and said the two favorites, Patch Adams and Chancellor McPatrick, really did not fire their best race. And crafty Irad Ortiz left on the lead, just ran them off their feet. However, upon a deeper look at it, and when I was preparing my notes for the show, I looked at it again, and it really was a nice ride by Irad on a compact, speed-oriented colt. He's all business, responded to different types of rousing through the race. He was hand-ridden at first, urged a little bit more in the turn, and then really produced a nice extra gear, almost when he didn't even have to late in the lane when he was opening up. My question, however, is, look at his final time. It came back as 1:42.30, decent time for a mile and a 16th. In fact, there has only been one faster clocking in the 44-year history of the Tampa Bay Derby. That was Tacitus, who went 1:41.90 back in 2019. So it historically came back as a very fast time. But I sometimes question, I don't have full evidence of this because I only look at and pay attention to the internal fractions of Tampa races for some of their bigger stakes. But I see a lot of fourth quarters coming back abnormally quick that it makes me question it. And I'm having a little hard time believing that the 23.92 fourth quarter split that Owen Almighty produced is accurate. If it is accurate, it's only 0.08 seconds slower than he ran his first opening quarter. And he finished up a final 16th in 5.84 seconds. I went back through 3 years of charts of all the Derby points awarding prep races, and that was the fastest final 16th in the past 3 years. Could have even been longer. I only had time to go back through 3 years worth of charts, but it was a nice effort. I'm having a little bit of a difficult time swallowing if those numbers are accurate, though.
Brian Lynch, screw the Pat Day Mile. You're going to the Derby. Listen to TD.
That's the other interesting part of this. There's a couple more interesting parts. First of all, about what TD's talking about. The time is accurate. The closing fractions are accurate. The racetrack surface was extraordinarily fast, which means that the pace that Owen Almighty set on that type of a racing surface was slow. It was for some reason, he got away. It looked like there was some other speed in the race, but he got away with very easy fractions on that kind of a racing surface. And that's why he was able to finish so fast. Now, what Zoe points out, that's going to be fascinating because Brian Lynch had, all but set in stone before the race that this was a prep for the Pat Day Mile. It was not a prep for the Kentucky Derby, but the way he won, the way he finished, the buyer was only at 92 because of how fast the racing surface was, right? Skippy Longstocking ran a buyer in the Challenger Stakes earlier on the card, 11 points faster. So it wasn't a fast time by that metric, but they're still, I think, debating on what to do next. The other interesting part, to me, is the ownership. Travis Boersma is a guy, I know you've probably run into him, Zoe, at the sales, who, with his brother, co-founded Dutch Brothers Coffee way back in 1992 in Grants Pass, Oregon. It has evolved into a $1 billion company. Travis Boersma went public with it in 2021. Growing up in Grants Pass, where there was Grants Pass Downs, he went to the racetrack with his father and grandfather as a kid, became a huge horse racing fan. And once he got all that money when the company went public, he decided, by gosh, I'm going to step up my involvement in the thoroughbred business. He had a couple claiming horses, whatever. He spent millions of dollars at the sales in Kentucky on mares, on racing prospects, and now Boersma, under the banner of Flying Dutchman Racing, Breeding and Racing, has his first legitimate Kentucky Derby contender, assuming that's the route they choose to go. So it's nice to have someone like that spending the money that he spent. Relative newcomer to the business. 2015 is when he first got involved in owning horses, having success like that.
And there used to be Board Short Stable,
yes,
was the tag name, because I can remember interviewing the kids at Santa Anita when they had runners out there. They were all in board shorts and they were all in flip-flops. It was really refreshing and very awesome. One point that we need to carry on with as well here, Chancer McPatrick with the blinkers on. I thought he ran well. Do we think maybe he didn't have the same kind of punch because he was closer? What are your thoughts, Randy, on Chancer McPatrick?
I just don't think he's that good, Zoe. I mean, it looked like, it's my opinion. It was a slow pace, but he was right there. He was in the pocket, a couple lengths back. Maybe had to wait a little bit coming to the top of the stretch, but he got out, and he certainly wasn't going to make up any ground on that closing quarter that TD referenced that Owen Almighty ran. I was very disappointed in the way he ran. I was very disappointed in Chad's other horse, Hill Road.
Yeah.
He ran so well in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile to finish third. He didn't change leads. Again, the pace didn't help him. He was last early, and it was his first start of the year, so he'll get another chance at a prep, I'm assuming. But those horses are going to have to really step up and run a lot better.
And remember, too, if the Winners Connections do stick to their original plan and aim for the Pat Day Mile, that was a strategy that worked out pretty well for Seize the Gray last year. He parlayed that into a win in the Preakness.
Good point. Good point indeed. Okay, TD, Grade 3 at Florida Oaks, run on turf, went to our old friend DJ Stable with Nitrogen. Your thoughts on this run?
I think Nitrogen made a little more work for herself and maybe had to make the bettors sweat it out at 3-2 a little bit there. She ran into a bit of a pocket, leaving the clubhouse turn and going on to the backstretch. Jose Ortiz got her settled down, put her into stock mode, just sitting right off of the shoulder of the pacemaker, and really kicked into a nice gear on the far turn. He had to give her a couple of cracks of the crop at the quarter pole, but Jose did a nice job of keeping her focused through the lane. There was some shifting and drifting, a little bit of lateral movement there, but that's pretty understandable because Nitrogen was just a maiden-breaking filly in her last start. She had broken her maiden in a stakes race at Gulfstream Park, so she's a little maybe back on the learning curve, but she moved forward with that effort, I think.
Yeah, you know what I thought was cool, guys? I had it on Tampa Bay Downs all afternoon long just because of the Tampa Bay Derby, right? So I watched Nitrogen's race, and lo and behold, there's our old friend Lynn Green, who sponsored this podcast for so many years, leading Nitrogen into the winner's circle with a big smile on his face. You know, he and John obviously operate DJ Stable, and they've had so much success. The stable's going great guns right now. And it was really cool to see Lynn getting to enjoy that, being at the track in Tampa and leading Nitrogen in there. She's now 2 for 2 this year, and looks like she's got a promising career ahead of her on the grass. And
that's what's so cool about this sport, that people, even with millions and millions of dollars, not specifically talking about Len Green, but we see it all the time with Rapoli. There's nothing like leading your horse into the winner's circle. You can't pay enough money to get that opportunity. We want to remind you, as always, the TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland. It was a big weekend of racing and a big weekend for Keeneland grads. This weekend alone, Keeneland September graduates Cavalieri won the Grade 1 Beholder Mile. Saffron Moon won the Grade 2 Hillsborough at Tampa Bay. And then good old Skippy Longstocking set a stakes and track record in the Grade 3 Michelob Ultra Challenge Stakes. That was the third time he's won that race. Absolutely amazing. That was also at Tampa Bay Downs. November graduate Owen Almighty scored an outstanding win as well in the Tampa Bay Derby. We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland.
Still catching. Leslie's Rose, Sierra, Leon.
Mike, $5 million. Thank you.
Carl Spackler, Immersive. He feels pretty. Hup!
This week's Fastest Horse of the Week brought to you by Timberlake, one of those fast sires at WinStar Farm. We know how good Into Mischief is. We know how good the sons of Into Mischief are. But Timberlake is the only son of Into Mischief that you can say these three things about. Timberlake was a TDN Rising Star, 1. He had a grade 1 win as a 2-year-old, 2. And he also had a graded stakes win in his 3-year-old debut. Timberlake also, if you want to throw a fourth thing in there, was a TDN Silver Value Sire. He stands for just $20,000 at WinStar Farm. Now, our fastest horse of the week, we alluded to him a minute ago, Skippy Longstocking, who won the Challenger Stakes on the Tampa Bay Derby undercard for a 3rd consecutive year. He's a remarkable horse, Skippy is. They only paid $37,000 for him at Ocala as a 2-year-old. He's now knocked out $3.5 million. He's yet to win a grade 1. He's 0 for 10 in grade 1 competition, but he has 8 grade 2 or grade 3 stakes wins, such as the Challenger. On Saturday, he beat Most Wanted, an up-and-coming horse in the Brad Cox stable in the older horse division. Nice win for Skippy Longstocking. Fire speed figure, the best of the week, 103.
It is now time for the Gainesway Guest of the Week, and I'm very happy to introduce Maggie Sweet. She is the Executive Director for the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. Maggie, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Zoe. I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Here in Ocala. What could possibly be better than that? All right. Let's get on and just discuss what's been going on with you and the TRF. What's one of the biggest challenges you've come across since joining the TRF? Because you went from working for Todd Pletcher for decades as his COO, handling $1 million horses, to now handling retired horses for the rest of their lives.
Yes, I think the thing you hit on there was for the rest of their lives. I would say with Todd, by the time they were 5, they were definitely off to a second career. Here at the TRF, I would say we don't get, the first ones we get are at 5. The average age of the herd is 21. So there's a lot of years that happen after the racetrack where they need to be taken care of. And I think that's one of the biggest learning curves.
Did you realize it was such a big undertaking when you first went to the TRF? Or is this something that you've learned over the course of the time you've been there and we're like, oh my goodness, there's so much more to this?
I would say it's definitely 2024 was a huge year of learning for me. You almost have to be involved in an organization throughout an entire year before you see every facet of it, I think, and every nuance. So 2024 was the big learning year. One thing that we did, and we actually just finished it, was strategic planning. So we spent 6 months doing strategic planning. And one of the main conclusions is that the TRF needs to educate the racing industry about who the TRF is, what exactly we do, how we're different from other aftercare organizations, and why you should support us.
Maggie, I understand that one of the key aspects that did come out of that 6 months of strategic planning was that specifically when you drill down that educational effort, one of the things that you guys found was that the industry needs to be more in tune with the realities of lifetime care for these horses. Could you touch on that a little bit, please?
Sure. Yeah, so the strategic planning, we have a really good board and we have a really good staff. And it's a lot of, passionate people, much like you find in the industry. It's usually people with a lot of passion and feeling for what they do. And we realized that what we are feeling is not being conveyed properly to the industry. So we're the only national organization that accepts retired racehorses for lifetime care, dignified lifetime care. I think owners, trainers, breeders, the lifeline of a horse, they tend to be, as I said before, like up until about, age 5. And when a horse is no longer able to compete on the racetrack, or when a horse is just not going to be a racehorse, your first instinct is, and this is me too, when I was with Todd, was, okay, let's get this horse, off the racetrack into a different place, move on to a second career. And I've watched that change over the years with Todd. That used to be a difficult thing to find a second home for a horse. And now it's become much more a matter of course. But I think what most of the industry participants have in their mind is the rehome, retrain, rehome model of it, which is a much shorter stay, therefore a whole lot less money than it costs to take a horse and keep it for 25 years. I mean, our cost per year, even if you budget at $3,000 per year, 25 years, that's $75,000. And I think other organizations have done a better job of telling their story. And so the industry has the industry thinks that, it costs $3,000 to rehome your horse, but it actually can cost $75,000. And that's something that we're trying to get across.
For the layman that's listening, can you just explain the kind of horses that you're keeping? So the TRF will keep horses that nobody else wants. Say you've got a very comfortable, I'm just going to phrase this like a 3-legged horse that's quite happy being a 3-legged horse. The TRF takes this horse and keeps it for a lifetime.
Well, I think one distinction that we also need to make is that we often get horses who have been through a number of other aftercare organizations. I think the ideal timeline of a horse is, say 5 years on the racetrack, then you go on to a second athletic career, then maybe you step down to, you're a lesson horse, and then you've got a 15-year-old who suddenly there's no place for that horse to go, and the horse still has 15 years of life. That is one example of a horse that the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation takes often. Another example is the horse that at age 5 can no longer compete on the racetrack, is not sound enough for a second athletic career. And then that's, the 25 years that the TRF, 25 years of dignified lifetime care that we are committing to.
Maggie, some of those horses that do require the lifetime care, actually they all require lifetime care, but the ones that require the extended lifetime care in the way that you just mentioned, they go to your Second Chances program, which is a collection of 8 correctional facilities. TRF is well known for this program. It gives a second career to horses. It gives a second chance at life to inmates who I understand aren't within your program called inmates. They're students, because they're learning a vocation that will help them once they do get released from that correctional facility. Touch on that a little bit. And one thing I was a little surprised to learn, I knew about the 8 correctional facilities. I didn't realize one of them was for juveniles.
Yes, the juvenile facility is in Ocala, and it is right next door to the women's facility in Ocala at Lowell Correctional, which I know that some of your readers or listeners have heard of because you've done stories about that facility. Also, because we're very proud of a graduate, Julianne Stowell, who last year won the Godolphin TIEA Newcomers Award, which is really indicative of what the Second Chances program can do for people. Not only did it teach her horsemanship skills, farm management skills, to the extent that she was lauded as the most impressive newcomer in the industry last year. I mean, that's a significant amount of skill and knowledge that she left this program with. What it does to human beings for their souls is probably the thing that I've taken from it more than anything. There's one woman in particular in Ocala who, there was a horse that unfortunately had not been responsibly retired. She was pulled from a bad situation. She went to Lowell. She was considered, dangerous and she was distant. And then there was this woman, this incarcerated individual who was in our program, who she had been given up on in life. And the two of them formed this team and they worked together. And by the end of it, you have this horse who has come back to herself, and this incarcerated individual who now has self-confidence. She has belief in herself. And it's transformational. It really is. It's very, very touching. Those of us in the industry know what horses can do. We know that they're courageous and they're resilient and they're not judgmental and they're intuitive and they make you be your best self. And to watch this all to come together is really, really moving.
Having been to Lowell myself, I can definitely second that. The facility there is outstanding, just one of 8 across the country. And some of the horses, I remember some of them running. They've got some X-race horses down there at Lowell. That's really cool to see them kind of not the best movers cantering around the field, but very happy and giving these women a chance to learn horses. How many horses would you have in the correctional facilities across the country? And is this something in the TRF's plan to really focus on more second chance programs for the horses?
So our herd is close to 400 horses, about half of whom are at these 8 correctional facilities across the country. We definitely are focusing on second chances. We changed our mission statement recently to reflect the fact that not only are we providing this dignified lifetime care for retired racehorses, but that they are serving as teachers in these vocational programs. So we're always looking for a chance to expand second chances with, a state government, so to speak, because they're very individual, where there's a synergistic approach. And part of the strategic planning is second chances can apply to many different instances. So are we going to do something other than a correctional facility sometime in the next 3 to 5 years? That's a possibility too. But we know correctional facilities, we know which programs work, and they're helping people, and they're also turning out very skilled horsemen and women.
Maggie, our industry is, even though we like to think it's a big, huge industry, it's really a very small industry compared to some other sports and some other industries. And it also operates very differently with the way that we take care of the people with industry-facing charitable organizations. For example, we take care of our equine athletes, the human athletes, the jockeys, and there are also very worthy charities that take care of the backstretch community. And in the end, I guess it's a lot of these well-meaning charities and excellent charities are chasing the same group of donors. And how does that affect the way that you do fundraising, not just at the TRF, but how does it affect everybody?
I think that's a really good point, that we are all kind of chasing the same funding source. It affects us in that we specifically have staff members whose only focus is to fundraise. I mean, you should be able to fundraise, but it would be wonderful if there could be some steady streams of revenue that were directed to nonprofits within the industry, so that you always knew, 25% of my operating budget is coming from this source and 25% is coming from this source. And I don't have to ask the same people over and over and over again for the money and wonder if it's going to come, just for planning purposes. Also, our industry is, like I said before, it's full of passionate people, but compassionate people who I think, when properly educated, will do the right thing.
You worked for Todd for an awful long time, Eclipse Award-winning trainer, Hall of Famer. That was your passion for a long, long time. How did you make the choice to go from Todd to the TRF? And what have you taken with you that you learned with Todd after decades working for him?
I'm going to blame Stephanie Brennan for that. There's so much to take from working for Todd. It was so much a huge part of my life, and it's so professional, but it's so passionate. There was just such a you're just part of this team, and you work so hard for this result. And I couldn't speak higher of Todd and my time with Todd. It was wonderful, and it certainly did set me up for this. It's a completely new challenge with things that I haven't dealt with before, but you can't come from working for Todd and not be able to transition to something else. Todd is a huge organization in one sense, but also a very small organization in another. So you end up doing everything. You get exposed to so many different parts of running a business that it is a bit of it's just an overall education, I would say.
Well, Maggie, thank you so much for joining us. It was delightful to have you on here.
I did have something that I wanted to shout out to the industry or a challenge. If the number of years that you've been in the industry is greater than the number of years you've been actively supporting dignified lifetime care, then please call me, contact me, come to our website, sign up for our newsletters, go to our social media. We have this collective responsibility to take care of these horses that were supporting us before we knew to support them, or before we were educated enough to support them, or before we were capable of supporting them. That's my final point. That's really what I want to get across, is that we have that legacy to deal with. And that has to be taken care of, as well as moving forward in the much more responsible way that we are.
Couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for your editor.
The guest of the week is brought to you by Gainesway, home to 4 new stallions this year, including Charge It. Charge It registered buyer speed figures of 100 or higher on 4 occasions. He won the Grade 3 1-mile wire by an outstanding 23 lengths, earning a career best 111 buyer speed figure. Charge It also posted 106 buyer in the Grade 2 Suburban Stakes at 1.25 miles with a 4 3/4 length victory there, tying the highest figure of all horses going that distance in 2023. A dominating multiple graded stakes winner, the son of Tappet, stands at Gainesway for an initial fee. This is a bargain basement fee of $12,500. Gainesway, power, passion, performance.
Charge It is pouring it on, winning the Dwyer by the length of the stretch. Charge It wins it convincingly in this Grade 2 Suburban.
On this week's edition of First Things First, our own Millie Ball caught up with Speedway Stables' Peter Fleur to talk about Cavalieri.
Very important race for these fillies and mares, the Grade 1 Beholder, won by Cavalieri, and I have her owner with me right now, Peter Fleur. Peter, she's undefeated. You bought her as a 2-year-old. What were you told when you were considering buying her about her potential?
Well, Marette Farrell, who helps us as a bloodstock agent, loved her physical. And we talked about the breeding, and Nyquist speaks for itself. And kind of beyond that, you just keep your fingers crossed. But Casey Weiner, my partner, and I are obviously thrilled with this victory today, and I wore a little Speedway red in the pocket for good luck.
Well, congratulations to you. That's a wonderful performance from Cavalieri.
Thank you so much.
Peter Fleur and his Grade 1 winner.
And yeah, she's a filly with an awful lot ahead of her. So good luck to Speedway Stables. Well done to Hall of Famer Bob Baffert. Do want to remind you that we will have a 4-day racing week this week at Santa Anita, Friday through Monday. So get your Irish on, lads, as we will be racing on Paddy's Day on Monday. We will have a pot of gold competition where you can enter for free and you have a chance to win up to $30,000. So come on out to Santa Anita and come on out for the luck of the Irish on Monday. All right, let's switch gears. After first things first, we move forward and stay with Santa Anita and discuss the Grade 1 Beholder Mile. Good to hear from Peter Floor talking about Cavalieri. And just in case, guys, you're wondering who she's named for, she is named for Lena Cavalieri, who was an opera singer back in the early 1900s, who was described as the most beautiful woman in the world. Quite fitting, really, for this gorgeous daughter of Nyquist. Randy, is she the next Adair Manor?
So she's not named for the 17th century Italian mathematician. I guess there's been more than one famous Cavalieri back in the day, right?
She's named for a beautiful woman.
She's named for a beautiful woman, and she ran a beautiful race in the Beholder Mile. Look, I thought it was going to be really tough to beat Ricci. We talked about that last week because Ricci was coming off a couple of fast sprints. It looked like she was going to be able to stretch out. Looked like, fractionally speaking, she was going to be able to get a clear early lead, uncontested. All of that transpired exactly the way I thought it would. And Cavalieri was just too good. Just too good. You called it last week, Zoe. Cavalieri was too good. Ran her down. Good effort for both horses. 101 by her speed figure. It doesn't always pan out this way in thoroughbred racing, but it will be really cool down the road, even if it's in the Breeders' Cup Distaff, if we get to see Cavalieri and Torpedo Anna square off against each other. That would be really nice.
I actually think you could make the case that Ricci is going to be the one to watch in her next race, because coming around the far turn, Cavalieri, who was even money, going for her 4th win out of 4 career starts, she was already being set down and asked 5/16 from the wire. And Ricci was not really set down until the quarter pole. And it was a long grind down type of stretch run. And I think Ricci did very well, holding as well as she could in that race. No quit in either of the top two. And as Randy said, the winner got a 101 by her. But when you run a triple-digit 100 in defeat, that ain't bad either.
That's Cavalieri, though. You got to pedal her. You got to pedal her. Shout out to my friend Marette Farrell, who purchased her at the OBS sale, which is where we're at right now for Speedway Stables. But she's 4 for 4 and becomes Nyquist's 8th Grade 1 winners. So congratulations to Speedway Stables for that. Guys, also at Santa Anita this past weekend, we had Eagles Flight back on the docket, perhaps better known as Flightline's little brother. But Randy, I think we can more than say he made amends at the hands of defeat with Miramati in his last start. He became a TDN Rising Star this past weekend at Santa Anita. What did you make of his performance?
It was a nice effort. I mean, it's unfair to compare him to Flightline. There's only been one Flightline. He's not going to be that good. But he could definitely make some noise in the stakes division in Southern California. And there are some similarities between he and Flightline, aside from the fact that they're half brothers. They're both trained by John Sadler. The ownership of Eagles Flight, you've got the Hronis brothers, and you've got Jane Lyon, and you've got the Farish family, who all three were involved in the ownership of Flightline. And also there's this, as of right now, mid-March of their 4-year-old season, right? Flightline had only run 3 times, and Eagles Flight has only run 3 times due to some minor setbacks along the way. But TD, I thought it was a nice effort for Eagles Flight. He looked good.
Yeah, he forced the issue on the front end. He took over seemingly at will about a half mile out. Just a couple, maybe 2 unfocused strides in upper stretch, but drew off nicely. And I guess he's bound for Stakes Company next time out. I'm not sure where he'll land, though.
Randy, lots of nice races. What kind of buyer does a nice race get?
He got a 100 buyer, a career high 100 buyer for that. That will win a lot of grade 3 stakes, maybe even the occasional grade 2 stakes. And that was only his 3rd lifetime start. So you would have to think that he's got more improvement in the tank just by the virtue of his inexperience. And also, of course, looking at his bloodlines. So he could definitely even move up from there and become a grade 1, grade 2 player.
Oh, and just to clarify, while he was a TDN Rising Star, it was last May. So Eagles Flight, TDN Rising Star. Let's move on, guys, and switch gears and head on down to Colonial, which is something I never thought I would say in March. We're heading to Colonial Downs for the Virginia Derby. I mean, kudos to them, guys. They've got a fantastic 10-race card on hand, highlighted by the $500,000 ungraded mile and an eighth Virginia Derby that has points towards the Kentucky Derby. I mean, how awesome is that, Randy?
Yeah, I mean, it was originally a turf race. It was a grade 2, then a grade 3 grass race of some note. And CDI decided they wanted to turn it into a Kentucky Derby prep race, which, of course, they can do because they own the Kentucky Derby. And it is now a prep race worth 50 points to the winner, and it's got a pretty nice field. John Hancock was entered. He's not going to run in the spot. Brad Cox is going to run him instead, if all goes well, in the Louisiana Derby the next weekend. But Brad has a horse called Rapture, who's an impressive maiden winner at Oaklawn Park in his last start, who will run in that spot. And also, Bob Baffert had to call an audible. He was going to run Gaming in this race, but Gaming spiked to fever. And so since this is a one-turn mile and an eighth, I mean, what a great spot for Getaway Car, the winner of the Sunland Derby with all his speed. So Getaway Car is now in there and will probably wind up, I'm guessing, as the favorite.
Yeah, Getaway Car is the morning line favorite for the race. Before I talk about him, however, let's just back up here for a minute and talk about the Virginia Derby being switched to March. In my reporting for TDN, I can be very critical of CDI. They're the big corporation. They sometimes come across as the 900-pound gorilla, but I have to give them credit. And I've been saying since they made the announcement in September that they were going to switch that from a late summer grass race to a mid-March points awarding Derby race. That's a pretty shrewd move. I think from a couple of perspectives. Number one, we're in the middle of the Derby chase. It's mid-March, and the third Saturday in March for the past 3 seasons has just been a black hole. It's been a dead spot. And that happened back when Oaklawn Park decided to switch its placement of the Arkansas Derby, which moved the Rebel Stakes back to late February. And there have been no meaningful 3-year-old stakes, no meaningful stakes, graded stakes of any kind for the past several years on the third Saturday of March. And they're moving it to Colonial. It's a dirt race. Colonial's not known for its dirt racing, but it's going to have a unique twist in that it's a 9-furlong, one-turn race. And in subsequent years, CDI has said, we are hoping to have grass racing on that weekend. So I think this is going to end up being a very nice weekend for them. They came in and took ownership, so to speak, of what was a dead weekend, and they're trying to make it into something. I would imagine that in a couple of years, when the new Belmont Park reopens and they host the Wood Memorial, that will also be a 9-furlong, one-turn race, because that's the way they run those races at Belmont. But pretty nice move. As for Getaway Car as the favorite, I wouldn't bet on him. I think he's going to be vulnerable coming off of that win in the Sunland Derby. He was really ridden hard off the far turn. He lost the lead turning into the lane, and he didn't so much claw that lead back as re-inherit it. I don't like him coming into the Virginia Derby. Who am I going to try and beat him with? I don't have a clue at this point. I usually don't have a clue anyway, but Randy had told us off the air before we started, and he mentioned, obviously, at the top of when we were talking about this race, that John Hancock was scratching. I like, after seeing what Owen Almighty did, the horse that John Hancock beat in the Sam Davis back in February, I kind of liked his chances, but he's not going to run, and I have not had time to regroup and figure out who I might like. But I would try and take a stand against Getaway Car.
Yeah, Coach
I like Rapture.
Rapture could win it, definitely. He looked good in that maiden win, and American Promise, the coach, could win it with Wayne Lucas. He'll have Caldera running the next week in the Louisiana Derby. If I can go lightweight here for a second, which I'm good at, there are also 3 of my favorite names in this race, Zoe.
Okay.
I mean, what better name for a son of Audible than Omaha, if you're a football fan, right? A nod to Peyton Manning there. What better name for a mare named Surrender Now, right? To have an offspring named Getaway Car, okay? And maybe my favorite in the bunch, if you're a comic book fan of any kind, back when you were young, maybe, there is a horse in here, Render Judgment, number 9, who's out of a mare named Barbara Gordon by Commissioner.
Oh, Batman?
Barbara Gordon was Batgirl,
Yeah.
right, in the old comic books, and her father was Commissioner Gordon. What a name.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, now they kind of dropped the ball by naming the offspring of Barbara Gordon Render Judgment, but still, I like the name of the family.
That could definitely be a trifecta. How about that? We should just box those up and go to the window.
You picked it up, though. Batman, you had it.
Batman. Yeah, I'm that old. Thanks, Randy. Thank you. Yeah. What's going on with the PHBA?
Well, Zoe, as always, the PHBA, thank you for the lead-in, is one of the sponsors of the TDN Writers Room. And again, we're going to be talking about Meet the 2025 Pennsylvania Stallions. We've been doing that every week now. Now we look at the roster of Mountain Springs Farm in Palmyra, Pennsylvania, the state's largest thoroughbred stallion station. Leading their roster of stallions is Enticed, who stands for $5,000. He raced and was formerly stood at Darley. Enticed is the son of Medaglia d'Oro. He won graded stakes on turf and dirt at 2 and 3, and he was even a top 10 first crop sire with 23 winners. Mountain Springs is also the home to Uptown Charlie Brown, Pennsylvania's leading stallion in both 2023 and 2024. Uptown Charlie Brown's the son of Limehouse. His progeny, as we've told you in the past, earned $2 million in Pennsylvania Breeders' Awards in the last 2 years alone, and Charlie stands for a $3,000 fee. Some of the other stallions there, Eastwood, go ahead, make my day, by Speightstown, 2023's leading PA stallion by average earnings, black type horses, and winners to starters. He stands for $2,000. Son of Curlin, Alejandro, stands for $1,500. Beverly Park by Munnings, $1,500. Tight 10. Son of Tappet stands for $2,500. Uncle Benny by Declaration of War, $2,500. And Well Spelled by Spellbinder at $1,500. To learn more about these stallions and much more about the Pennsylvania Breeding Program, you can take a look at the 2025 Stallion and Boarding Farm Directory online at pabred.com, or you can call that number, 610-444-1050.
PA Bred, I think we've built a brand at this point.
It's excitement at every step.
Roses for Deborah just set a new track record.
On average, for the past decade, Pennsylvania paid over $28 million a year in Breeders' Awards, restricted races, and owner bonuses. Plus, PA Bred shine on the world's biggest stage. Just 3 states have bred more Breeders' Cup winners. Learn more at pabred.com.
Be a smarter better with First TV, the best horses, with thousands of exclusive morning workouts, all at your fingertips and delivered right into your inbox. Everything you need to be informed. Be smart, bet smart with First TV.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by First TV. Now, we've had a lot of rain out there in Southern California, so it's only fitting that Bob Baffert took some of his best horses to the training track. We take a good look at Gaming, who was clocked over the Topeta. He went in 1:12 and 3. He's on the inside there. This was last Friday, working at Santa Anita. Now, he was expected to be entered in the Virginia Derby, but he did spike a temperature, so he will not go. But you have to say, he looks good in this work, and it looks like we'll see him in just a couple of weeks. So a good look at Gaming there, trained by Hall of Famer Bob Baffert. Let's move on, guys. And if you read the TDN and subscribe to it, you will have read a really good article by our good friend Dan Ross, who basically penned an article. The headline was, "Are so few really capable of training good horses?" And he highlights Dan Blacker, talking about something we've talked about a lot on this podcast with the super trainers and all of the good horses just going to a handful of trainers, 4 or 5 select trainers. TD, can you weigh in on this first for us?
Yeah,
Clarify it?
I think Dan's op-ed articulated the issue really well. Why is there such a collective mindset in the industry that the guys at the top of the food chain keep getting good horses thrown at them and cycling through their barns? And we've seen that over the years. We've seen that. You could probably trace it back to the 1970s when Jack Van Berg started to have divisions at many different racetracks all throughout the country, and a lot of horses cycled through his barn. And then we saw it happen with Dwayne Lucas, continued that on, and Todd Pletcher and Bob Baffert. I think we all agree that it's an issue or a problem, if you want to call it a problem, but I still don't have a clear understanding of what is the solution. Dan does mention in his op-ed that this is a quote, the industry has agency over which horses might go to which barns. And I'm still unclear of how you would work that. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I think there are complications and there are risks about when you try and foster competition by, in ways, limiting competition. It just doesn't work out too well. So I think while a lot of us acknowledge that it's an issue or a problem, I don't really know what the solution is.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is one, TD. I mean, we know the how, what, when, where, why of the situation, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is, if I had a $500,000 yearling purchase that I wanted to try to win the Kentucky Derby with, I'd go to Bob Baffert probably, or Todd Pletcher, or Brad Cox, or one of the big names, in the business, guys that have been there before and have done it before. And I don't, you can't blame owners for wanting to do that. I mean, I have proposed something in past podcasts along the lines of limiting the horses that a trainer, the individual horses that a trainer can start at a meeting. Not stalls, just the individual number of horses that they can start. But I'm not even sure that would be a solution to it, because take a guy like Brad Cox, right? He wants to win the Kentucky Derby as much as anybody. He's not going to turn down an expensive yearling. If in my scenario, if he's running close to the max on numbers at a particular racetrack, I mean, hell, Brad's got horses at Oaklawn. He's got horses at the Fairgrounds. He's got horses at Gulfstream. He's got horses in New York. He's got horses in Turfway. Yeah, he can just farm them out to another location. So I don't know if there really is a solution other than work on getting the foal crop up. That's really a big part of the problem, I think, is that there just aren't enough horses to go around.
Is it hard to fathom that Dan Blacker won the Breeders' Cup Sprint? He wins over in Saudi. He's barely picked up any new owners, and he's a young guy, an up-and-coming young trainer. You'd think, his resume now would speak for itself and the doors would be opening and like, come on in. And it just hasn't happened.
Yeah. I mean, you can just go down the line at guys that won the Kentucky Derby that were unheralded trainers going in. David Cross with Sunny Salo, Cam Gambalotti with Spindabuck, right? And John Service had made a name for himself in the Mid-Atlantic, but not necessarily nationally at the time of Smarty Jones. What an amazing job he did with Smarty, right? I mean, you can just name a bunch of guys like that. It's a mystery.
I just think one thing we have to touch on, though, is the notion of a horse shortage. And I used to say horse shortage a lot myself. I'd say that in my reporting for TDN. But one point that I would bring up that I didn't realize this until somebody in the bloodstock industry in Kentucky brought this up to me while I was during my course of reporting a story. And the horse shortage is almost a misnomer, because what we're really dealing with is an owner shortage. And as this person in the bloodstock industry mentioned to me, the American bloodstock industry stands willing and ready to start producing more horses if there are owners out there to buy them. What's happened is the market has fallen and it's reorganized itself in ways where the top part of the market is way up there in the bloodstock industry, and the middle part of the market has just shrunken out of existence. And that's why you see those middle type of owners, those middle level trainers, they're vanishing. So the horses are capable of being produced if people are out there buying them.
Yeah. So it's a horse shortage as a result of an owner shortage.
I would say that's, yeah. And it took me a while to figure that out and to start phrasing it that way, but that's the way I think now.
Good reporting, nevertheless, by Dan Ross in his op-ed in the TDN. If you haven't seen it, look it up. All right, we've got some sad news to report. It's been reported all week long that Clen Murphy, one of the most respected members of the Coolmore team, died just a few days ago after a short illness. He died at 75. A lot of people reaching out on X and Twitter to express their condolences. And one thing that you got from this, Demi O'Byrne described him as a magnificent man. Nobody had a bad word to say about Clen Murphy. I've met him a couple of times. He was always the nice guy with Demi, the nice guy, because Demi could be hard on the salespeople at the sales. I think Marette Farrell, my good friend, described it best. She described him as a man who could play all the keys on the piano. I thought that was very, very fitting. Did you ever run into him, Randy?
I was introduced to him once, and just said hi to him, and I knew who he was. He was an accountant originally in Ireland, joined the Coolmore team back in 1978, so he's been with Coolmore throughout its stratospheric rise to the top of the worldwide breeding and racing industry. He was always at the sales. He loved to go to the Breeders' Cup and loved to go to the races as well. We could have used him in the United States. John Magner had this to say about him. He told the TDN this. He said Clen was an extraordinarily clear thinker who could always find solutions where others saw only problems. Every business could use somebody like that. American racing could use somebody like that. And actually, when you dig a little deeper, he was on the board of the Breeders' Cup. Now, what's one of the most successful aspects of American horse racing? It's the Breeders' Cup. What's one of the most successful parts of the Breeders' Cup? The international participation that it gets every year. The last 15 years, what's been one of the biggest innovations at the Breeders' Cup? Making it a 2-day event, expanding the turf racing, expanding the international participation. Clen Murphy was said to be one of the driving forces behind that, behind the expansion into 2 days and the expansion of turf racing at the Breeders' Cup. So Clem has had an impact on American racing in a pretty big way. So sad news indeed.
All right, let's move on. Trevor Denman has called it a day, called it a night. I would have loved to have heard his last race call. Like, he went out on a high note. It wasn't like, I'm going to retire at this day. He just said, yeah, I'm done. 72 years old. He's going to go and do some fun things. He came here in 1976 and he revolutionized race calling. I obviously wasn't here in 1976 because I'm so young, guys. But I can tell you, when I first came to Santa Anita, even I'd been on the East Coast, but I'd never really heard Trevor Denman. And I was just like, oh, who's this guy? He's bloody awesome. And he really was. I mean, you listened to him for years, Randy.
Oh, yeah. I'm not, I don't want to dog announcers of the past, announcers of yesteryear, some of the famous names that everybody, that's a big student of horse racing has heard of. Clem McCarthy on the East Coast and Joe Hernandez on the West Coast. I'm not trying to dog those guys because times have changed, tastes have changed. But you go back and you listen to those old calls, and it's like so-and-so first by a length, so-and-so second by 2, so-and-so third by 3. And it's like watching paint dry compared to what we're accustomed to now. And Trevor Denman helped change that narrative. He didn't just tell you where the horses were during a race. He described the whole tapestry of the way the race was unfolding. He told you what was happening, not just where they were. And Tom Durkin followed in that same vein. And if you bet on a horse that was running and Trevor was calling the race and Trevor told you that your horse was in trouble, you might as well just tear up your tickets because the horse was not going to win. He was that keen, that perceptive in the way the race was developing, and that good at translating that to the public with his race calls.
And he has influenced an entire subsequent several generations of race callers because of that here in America. Now, the European And where Trevor came from, South African style, was always a little bit more narrative, even going back into the 1970s. But when Trevor started his first full-time gig in 1983, he was astounding people at Santa Anita by saying, he was mentioning the jockey's body language. He was telling you whether a horse's ears were pricked or not, and telling you how comfortably or not the horses were running back then. And you have to remember, he did that against a paradigm where the reason that some of those older generation race callers sounded so boring, for lack of a comparative term compared to what we hear today, was because announcers back then were almost forbidden to call tight photos, because there was a fear that people would rip up their losing tickets and cause a ruckus at the racetrack. And there was even, I remember in New York, it was a rule that the announcer could not say who the trailing horse was. You could not say the word last, because that would be embarrassing to the slow horses connections. So when Trevor came in, it was a whole new ball game, and you heard everything from his understated "and away they go," and horses scraping paint coming up the inside rail, and horses coming like an express train, and horses that would have to sprout wings. And perhaps his best known one is "moving like a winner." And Zoe, you mentioned his last race call. I went back and listened to what, I kind of wondered if Trevor knew that his last race at Del Mar in September would be his final race call. And he did use that "moving like a winner" call in that race. And I looked up for a tribute piece that I penned for Trevor in the Week in Review in TDN. And back in 1983, Andrew Beyer, within several weeks of Trevor landing stateside, went out to Santa Anita and did a profile on him. And within that story, Trevor articulated how he came upon that "moving like a winner" call. It was the big race in South Africa, and it was 1978. There was a horse named Politician in the race, and Politician was buried in the field of 18. And Trevor picked up that this horse was moving, and he said, "Politician is moving like a winner." And his first thought was, after the words came out of his lips, were, why did I say something so audacious as that? But then when Politician did win, Trevor admitted to Andy Beyer, that really put me on the map. And I think one other thing is Trevor's going to be remembered for his catchphrases, kind of a reel of greatest hits, so to speak. But let's also not forget something important that Trevor did was, once he became established here in the States after about 10 years, he's in the early 1990s, when nobody else was doing this, he started speaking up and being very vocal about the cruelty of the whip, horses who were sore and lacking veterinary oversight and being put in to fill races. And Trevor had built up enough gravitas at that point that those words stung, but they were also credible words coming from a credible source. And some of his criticisms resulted in changes that are the forerunner of the changes that we see today. So we'll remember him for his catchphrases. He exuded class, just like he said he was calling horses did. But let's remember that the guy is not limited to the catchphrases that he produced.
I got one more thing to say about Trevor Denman's retirement. And away he goes.
I will add in may I add in one more story about Trevor that I don't think has ever been told before. And it was really, I've only met Trevor a handful of times in my life, but one time stood out to me, and it was Memorial Day weekend, 1996. I was at Suffolk Downs working in the press box, and I was also the backup announcer to Larry Colmus. And Larry had gone to Monmouth for his gig that started on Memorial Day weekend. So we brought in at Suffolk Downs Trevor to call the races. That was the first year that he was no longer doing every track on the SoCal circuit. He had left Hollywood behind. And Trevor loved to go up. He needed a break, and he realized he was a fresher race caller for it. And he went to his farm in Minnesota, and he spent time there between meets. And the one thing that I'll never forget is I went to the airport to pick Trevor up with another colleague at Suffolk Downs. We greeted him, and the very first thing he said to us was, "Boys, I have a favor to ask of you." And Trevor laid it out, and he said, "When I go to my farm in Minnesota to unwind, I go into a news blackout for racing. I don't look at racing. I don't look at results. I don't read stories. I don't have anything to do with the game. That's what keeps me fresh." So mind you, this was in May of 1996. And he said, "So my request is I don't want anybody during my 4 days here calling races, and he was doing a lot of interviews and meet and greets with fans. I don't want anybody to reveal to me who won the Kentucky Derby or who won the Preakness. And I don't find out who won the Triple Crown until my first day at Del Mar. And then I reveal it to myself. That was the way he operated. So,
wow.
Imagine this. We had Trevor for the whole weekend, and we told the reporters who were going to interview him, we could at least pull them aside and say, hey, here's the deal. He doesn't want to know, so please don't ask him. But he was doing tons of meet and greets with fans. So we had to kind of hover around Trevor for the entire weekend, like the Secret Service, and fling ourselves in front of anybody who seemed ready to ask or mention the triple. And that was the year, 96, that it was a very impactful year because Grindstone had won the Derby, and then he didn't run the Preakness because he was out with an injury. So, of course, it was at the top of everybody's mind, but we were constantly flinging ourselves in front of people and making, you want to meet Trevor? What do you want to ask him? And we made it through the entire weekend without blowing the Triple Crown for Trevor.
No Twitter, no Facebook, no Instagram.
No,
it was much easier back then.
Just a bunch of dairy cows at his Minnesota farm, yeah.
What's happening with West Point? Mr. Finley. I saw him. He's out here shopping if anyone wants to join West Point. Terry Finley is in the house.
Terry Finley and West Point, one of the sponsors of the TDN Writers Room. He and bloodstock agent David Ngordo consider Jackson Traveler to be one of the few bright spots in the stable from those early days of the COVID-19 pandemic back in 2020. That's because they were able to get the Maryland-bred son of Munnings at the OBS spring sale of 2-year-olds in training for a final bid of $140,000. And on Saturday, Jackson Traveler will run in the Whitmore Stakes at Oaklawn Park, $250,000. He carries a 4-race winning streak into the Whitmore, which, oh, by the way, he won last year by a nose for his Hall of Fame trainer, Steve Asmussen. Meanwhile, West Point and David Ngordo, as Zoe pointed out, have been busy recruiting their new 2-year-olds at OBS March this week. You can see photos and videos of all the new West Point editions at www.westpointtb.com.
All the thrills. Fraction of the bills. Experience the power of the partnership. Change your life, make new friends, and compete at the highest level of thoroughbred racing. West Point Thoroughbreds, the gold standard in racing partnerships. Visit westpointtb.com.
And that brings us to a close, guys. It's been fun. I mean, who needs Bill Finley anyway, right, TD?
What a nice host Zoe is.
I'm just kidding. It's been fun, guys. We'd like to thank Randy. TD, thank you so much. Our Gainesway Guest of the Week, Maggie Sweet, along with the big boss, Sue Finley, Katie Petruniak, and Ali and Anthony the Rocker. We'll see you next week.